Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this session of the 2025 College Sports Communicators U Summit, our two-day online learning experience for those new in the athletic communications and creative profession and those seeking a career in this field. We're excited to welcome the newcomers to the athletic communications field, graduate students, graduate assistants, undergraduate students, interns, all those aspiring to be in our profession in today's summit. Thank you for joining this session. Writing is not a lost art, how-tos and strategies when creating creative content. Each of our four live summit sessions is hosted by the CSC U committee, whose goal is to work with young and aspiring professionals and provide guidance, continuing education sessions, and mentorship. CSCU's motto is to educate educators and find our future. I'm Grant Cohen. I'm the Assistant Athletic Director for Media Relations at Tarleton State University, and I will serve as the moderator for this session. We welcome your questions at any time. Just place them in the Zoom Q&A function, and we will make sure to get those answered as soon as possible. Please do not use the chat section to ask these questions. We've got a great discussion ahead, so let's get started. And just as a reminder, we are recording this Zoom session, and later on our CSC website and YouTube channel, you can watch it on demand or invite others to do so. We will also offer it as a podcast. We've got a great group of panelists here today, and I'll let them introduce themselves, starting with Dani, then Graham, then Drew.
Thanks, Grant. And thank you all for joining today. Really excited about this discussion we're about to have. I'm Dani Gariglio, Assistant Athletic Director for Operations at Davidson College. Recently in a new role, but have worked in athletic communications for 8 years now. And specifically at Davidson, I've worked with our volleyball, lacrosse, both basketball programs, football. So kind of done a myriad of things in the 5 years that I've been here. So thanks.
Thanks, Grant. Thanks, Dani. I'm Graham Hayes. I'm an athletics writer at Vanderbilt. I worked on the other side of kind of the media line for 20 plus years, covering women's sports at ESPN, and came over to Vanderbilt probably about 4.5 years ago, I guess. So just kind of handle all sorts of writing tasks, whether that's feature writing, storytelling, releases, script writing, communications for executives. So just kind of the whole width and breadth of what you can do with writing. So I'm enjoying my time so far.
Hi, everyone. I'm Drew Wilson. I'm the Assistant AD for Communications and Administration here at Division III Averett University. Began my career after college in newspapers as a journalist and sports editor, and then jumped into this field 17 years ago, and I've been at Averett the entire time.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah, excited to get this discussion going. Let's get right into it. I know in this field, we write a lot of different stuff, right? We write social media posts. We're writing articles. We're writing also everything we do in this field has to do with writing in some form of capacity. Why do we write for the most part? It's mainly to tell a story. So my first question for the panelists is, what do we gain from storytelling, especially with a written article? Dani, I'll start with you, and then I'll go with Graham, and then Graham and Drew.
Yeah, I think the cool part about written storytelling is just the ability that you sometimes have to go so much more in depth than you often have when doing, I guess, digital storytelling, whether that be social media, like with a graphic or a video piece. Just the way you can be nuanced and a little bit more thorough in what you're telling and the story that you're telling. That's what comes to mind immediately for me.
Yeah, I would echo what Dani says. To me, it's the bond that you can create with the audience that can be deeper in some ways with the written word. Like I love social media. I love kind of the modern media world and kind of the ability it gives you to sample so many things and browse through the whole world in a way we didn't used to be able to do so quickly. But that does kind of come at the cost of depth sometimes and nuance. So with the written word and kind of balancing all the different mediums, I think the written word kind of complements actually the newer forms. And there's kind of this idea out there that people don't read anymore, and there's certainly data to back up that people read less. But I think we sometimes confuse less with none, and there are still a lot of readers out there. There are also a lot of people who connect to content visually and through the written word. So kind of having all those parts of the puzzle kind of fitting together is why I feel like the written storytelling still matters a lot.
I would agree with that as well. I mean, just the level of depth you can go into in a written form versus whether it's video or some other form. I think the other thing too that you all haven't mentioned as well already is I think that when you have somebody's attention with something written, they're not scrolling necessarily, and you maybe can get their attention and be able to tell that story with a sole focus. Because if they came to that to read, they're probably going to stick with it the entire way through.
Absolutely. And I just from my personal experience as well, I love how for a written piece you can go just so much in depth and as much as you want. Like, I know with our Twitter and social media and Instagram, like there's a time limit on like videos and stuff like that. So, but writing, there's really no word cap. You can write, tell a story in 500 words or 1,500 words. So definitely I love the in as much in depth as you can go with a written piece. For Drew, I'll start with you on this next question. Where do you get your story ideas from? What excites you about a story?
I think for me, I listen to what's going on around campus. Try to keep your ear to the ground, whether that's with your teams, your coaches, student athletes. Sometimes it'll even come from my student workers. Things that they hear on campus that I wouldn't be privy to. So I think it's kind of listening in and seeing what might make a good story in your mind, and then what if it gets you excited, it's probably going to get somebody else excited as well. So I think just listening in and trying to figure out what makes sense, and then figuring out what's the best form and all that. But I think just listening to your student athletes and your coaches can help generate some of those ideas early on.
Yeah, sorry. I would just add to that we have great SIDs at Vanderbilt, and I think that's the best resource that I have certainly is these people know the student athletes and the coaches so well that they'll come up with ideas. And one of the things that I love about being kind of in the university setting is just that it's such a contained environment as opposed to in the media landscape. You're trying to keep tabs on every team in the league or every team in the conference, and it's really hard to kind of drill down and figure out who all these people are on the rosters and all the coaches are within the university setting, kind of with the help of the SIDs, you really get a chance to learn more about kind of who these people are and where the stories are. Like just as an example, we have a new volleyball program at Vanderbilt, bringing it back after about 45 years. And I went to one of their spring matches recently, and like what jumped off the page, we have a 5'3" player, and on a court full of giants, you tend to notice a 5'3" player. Just like, well, that might be a cool story. It might not. There might be nothing there. But then you kind of speak with the SID, speak with the coaches, and you find out that she's the third sister who's playing D1 volleyball, and one of her sisters played for our new coach at a different school, and she's an early enrollee, coming in this spring semester out of high school. So when something kind of piques your curiosity, like Drew was talking about, then you kind of have the chance to dig in deeper and figure out if there's a story there that's worth telling beyond that kind of surface level.
Yeah, I would just tack on to kind of what both of you guys have said. I'm a really big like proponent of social listening, and like with the amount of time I feel like I spend on social media for work purposes solely, whether I'm like on the Davidson volleyball Twitter account and or the Instagram account, when I'm posting my own content there, like what am I seeing kind of out of their day-to-day lives that might be worth telling some kind of story. Um, an example like I have with that is we had a volleyball player a couple years ago who I was on volleyball Instagram posting something. She posted a family photo, and I knew her family. They'd been to a ton of games, but I noticed in this family photo, Landry Shamet he's an NBA player, all of a sudden was in her family pictures on Instagram. And I was like, Anela, like, what's the story here? And literally the summer before, she had found out that her and her two siblings she grew up with were also half siblings with Landry Shamet, who was then on the Phoenix Suns. And I was like, if you're comfortable with this, like we have to figure out a way to tell this story. And that's not something she was super public about and wasn't actively telling people, but I kind of just stumbled upon it. So I think Drew touched on this too, like trusting your gut. If you hear something that you're like, oh, this is like a story that people would want to know about, just trusting that instinct to dig a little bit deeper into it.
See, and just from there, I learned something new. Landry Shamit is actually a good friend of mine because we were at Wichita State together. So I learned something new about. See, I
There
learned
you go.
something new about him that I didn't even know. So that's awesome. Yeah. So for the audience, just as a reminder, we'll accept any of your questions at any time. So feel free to submit those in the Q&A, and we'll get those as many of those answered as possible. But yeah, so feel free to jump into those questions. For the next question I have for the group is, you know, for each person, what's your writing process like for an article? How do you start a piece? Because I think probably a lot of people that I know that like when I started out as writing, that's one part I really struggled with. I was like, man, how do I start this? Like, do I start with the lead? Do I start with the quotes? Do I start with the bulk of it? Like, what's the writing process for each of you?
I'll start on this one. Well, first of all, I feel like starting is sometimes the hardest part is like just getting those first couple words down on the page. But something I found that really helps me, like especially after you've sort of done a sit down interview with somebody, I like to just transcribe everything that we just talked about that I've recorded, and lay it all out there on the page because I think for me, I'm such a visual person. So like if I can see a sound bite or a quote from them that's like really grabby and attention worthy, that sometimes helps me with like how I want to start things off.
Graham?
Yeah, I would add like I've had kind of the same battle with that I find kind of transcribing the quotes is really really helpful. It's also tempting sometimes to use a service to kind of do it automatically to save time, but I do really feel like Dani was saying that when you stop and listen to what the conversation you just had, it really drives home a lot of things that you can miss kind of while you're listening and trying to do the interview and think about the next question and all of that. Um, the other thing that for me, like the writing process, I try really hard to go into a story without an idea of what I want the story to be, if that makes any sense. Like I want to try and get a picture and then you get out of that. And maybe the story is something totally different than what I thought of. But if you have kind of a broader, wider conversation in the interview you're doing in the reporting, then you kind of have more leeway to figure out what the story is, and you don't have to force the story as much. So really trying to kind of go into things with an open mind and not pre-write the story, I find kind of helps me get through the writing process.
I would say for me, like I got so used like early in my career writing on deadlines as a newspaper journalist. Like I'm always like the what's the story, and like in my mind I'm already creating like what the lead is and or thinking about those things. So when that transitioned to something like feature writing, I still kind of do that a little bit. But like Dani, I like to do, I have an idea of what I want it to be or what I think it might be. But then when I do the quotes and, do the interviews and then transcribe the quotes, I pull everything out aside and figure out, okay, is that still where I want to go with it? Or is there something else new I found out that makes me want to go a different route? And sometimes, that changes my mind on what I do. And other things like, um, just really trying to find that good quote, as it was already said. What might catch somebody's eye really quickly, and that helps me kind of generate where I go. Start a story, especially, and what I think might catch a reader's eye, because, like we've talked about, people's time is valuable, and you want to try to get them in. If you can find that entry, that doorway to that story quickly, it allows people to maybe get involved and get into it and stay with it.
Absolutely. And and kind of jumping into the next like topic here. I know like there's so many different types of writing out there. And as SIDs, we have to be able to adapt quickly to various types of writing. I know just from personal experience, I started out as a newspaper sports reporter, and then I moved up into like a student assistant in the communications department my senior year. And obviously writing between, public relations and, newspaper are two very different styles of writing, as is, social media writing as well. It's kind of a whole new ballpark as well. What advice do you have for having to ditch the serious and / informative writing and create fun and engaging writing for social media? Drew, I'll let you start with this one.
I think it's almost very similar to like social media. I think some of the things that draw us in are the things that give us emotional ties or draw us in through some sort of feeling. And I think for me, like, it's trying to do the same thing with writing. It's trying to get that emotional tug on something if you have the right content that can do that, and just draw people in through that way. But I think that's probably the one I would say for me that I look at the most.
Yeah, I would echo that. And also just especially with social media, like don't be afraid to kind of have fun with it and like just like let loose a little bit. Like obviously within the realm of what you and your institution are comfortable with. Um, but like that's kind of all why we go to social media, is like to sort of escape from what we're actively doing. So try to use that sort of voice to just like, we're all consumers. You know what you like to see on social medias when you go to consume content. So what might draw other viewers and readers in for you when you're writing social media copy?
Yeah, I feel like I'm still trying to learn how to do that well. But one thing that I will try and do, if kind of you have a quote that works, I feel like using their a subject's words, kind of, if you can make it pithy and you can make it short enough to fit in the space you have, really kind of helps focus attention on what the story is going to be about.
Absolutely. Yeah, that great discussion and great insight from all of our panelists there. And I know from when it comes to writing, it's really important to grab the reader's attention, and it's really done so for the first two paragraphs, the lead and the nut graph. So in y'all's mind, what makes for a good lead? What makes for a good nut graph? And how do you let the story do the speaking with the writing? Graham, I'll start with you on this question.
Yeah, I feel like I have many years of editors who are rolling their eyes at me answering this question, because I tend to be a little bit long-winded in intros, and I tried to get better at that over the years. But like, it is important to be concise. It is important to get across kind of what you really want people to understand about the story, so that they will keep reading, obviously. But I try to be, true to myself, and like sometimes I feel like telling a story to get the person into the story can be really useful, and kind of putting them in the space, kind of breaking down that wall so that they don't feel like they're reading a report. They feel like they're actually in a part of the story, and they can identify with the people that you're talking about. So like, I absolutely encourage people to be concise in the intros and get to the nut graph and say what you want to say. But I would also just say, don't be afraid to do some storytelling there if it can fit.
Dani?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just kind of thinking about that. Graham covered it pretty well. I knew he'd be the pro on this one. But yeah, just like trying to be as gravitating and entertaining as you can early on, so that you do like hook the reader. Like we've all heard that before. But I think Graham's point is huge on just like getting your reader invested in the story as early as possible, so that you're not telling them the entire story in that first paragraph or two, but you've gripped them enough that like they're buckled in and they want to be a part of the ride, however long the rest of that story is going to be.
Yeah, I totally agree with both of those things. And I think for me too, like as I mentioned just a minute ago, like trying to get that emotional grab early on is important. For me, it's being concise, but also being descriptive. Because I think if you can set that scene and build that scene for somebody as they're reading it, it maybe draws them in a little bit as well.
I'd add to it, like, one at Vanderbilt, I've learned, covering sports that I'm not that familiar with and trying to kind of communicate those to the audience, that like, it can be useful to remember that you're not necessarily talking to experts on the sport or people who are passionate about that one particular sport. So kind of finding a way early in the lead or in the nut graph to kind of to bring to show the reader kind of an example of how what you're talking about translate to something else. Like if you're talking about bowling, somebody bowls a 300 game, kind of compare that to a hole in one in golf or something like that. Find ways to kind of make it universal so that even if a lot of your readers aren't well versed in what they're reading about, they can understand kind of what you're getting at right away, so that you don't have to spend a lot of time in the rest of the story kind of explaining that.
Absolutely. And the audience, don't forget, we still have plenty of time for your questions. Feel free to submit those in the Q&A, and we'll get those answered in this session. Still got plenty of time here. Yeah. So the next question I have for the group is, how is building relate? Obviously, like as SIDs and working in athletics, we have a very unique insight with our student athletes and with the coaches. That it's a trust factor, really. We're working with that. We have a working relationship with them, and we have to eventually build their trust. That's part of the job. How is that building those relationships with the coaches and student athletes related to telling the best story possible? Drew, I'll start with you on this one.
Sure. I think building that relationship is extremely important, because if the first time you meet somebody, you go up to them and ask them a question, and they've never talked to you at all, they're not going to feel comfortable opening up. You've got to slow play it a little bit and really try to build their confidence and trust in you. And if you're going to tell their story, they need to know that you care and that you're a part of their story. I'll give an example. One of our men's golfers is at the national championships this week, and a couple of years ago, he he got diagnosed as a kid with cystic fibrosis, and so he got to meet Roy McIlroy as Make a Wish thing a couple of years ago. It had kind of gotten delayed, but that was like right before his sophomore year, and I just didn't feel like that was the right time to go about telling that story, because I didn't know him. I didn't know if he wanted to talk about it. He wasn't as mature, and now that he's a senior this year, it was the right time, and so it all kind of worked out. So I think timing sometimes has to deal with that as well. But it's really about just how getting that person comfortable to open up and talk about things, and feeling like you can tell their story the right way.
Yeah, I think trust is everything, and relationship building is at the core of that. Like, to kind of piggyback off of Drew, just sometimes the best stories are not the easiest ones to tell as a writer, but also as like the person whose story it is, and it's not super comfortable for them. So you have to make sure that you're someone that this person trusts and is comfortable opening up to, because they have to trust that you're going to take good care of their story and tell it in a way that's authentic to them. So getting to know the people and knowing that your coaches and athletes are going to trust what you do with the work.
I totally echo all of that. Like I'd also add that like you can, even if you don't know the person that well beforehand, you can build trust during the interview, I find, just by the simple act of listening. Like so often people just hear but don't listen, I guess is the phrase. And like I'm not in a lot of media scrums anymore, thankfully. But like going back to like it always used to drive me up the wall that people would be in a scrum that ask somebody a question, hold their recorder up, and then like while the person's answering, the person who asked the question kind of turns away and looks around the locker room trying to figure out where they're going to go next and what's the next thing they need to do on their list. And it's like, who raised you? Like, are you if you're asking this person to kind of give you their time and give you their thoughts, like just listen to them. It's common courtesy, but also like it's good practice, because once they understand that you're listening and you actually want to hear what they have to say, it makes them more comfortable, because that makes it more like a natural conversation. Even if you don't have a long history with that person, they're going to kind of understand that you're in this to try and understand them. And hopefully, if you work for the university, they're going to understand that you aren't going to burn them. So it kind of puts them at ease.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think all of those are key. And something I would like to add as well. Whenever I've learned that giving them the last word is always like it's always going to be to the benefit, because They might whenever I'm doing an interview, I always, my last question to them is there anything that you would like to add that I did not ask? And I've learned that there's a lot of discussions that can be opened just by that. Some 9 times out of 10, you might say, no, I'm good. But that 1 time out of 10, I've gotten so many great responses that wow, this adds to the story. So I think if you're making the interview about them as opposed to asking what you need to ask, then I think that goes a long way for sure. We got some great audience questions here that I'll jump into. For this first one, I know that as SIDs, especially if we have a late night game, and it's double overtime, it's 11 o'clock at night. We're just wanting to get that recap out. We're just wanting to get that preview out and get ready. It can feel repetitive at times. Let's be honest for that. How do you balance the writing these types of pieces concisely and getting to the point, but also making sure that we're not going through the motions when writing this recap and making sure we're telling the best story possible in these pieces?
And I'll start. I don't do a lot of recaps, so I might not be the best voice, but I think one thing to not be afraid of is an old fashioned write through. You can get kind of a nuts and bolts recap up that night, like you're talking about. You're up late at night, double overtime. People just want to hear kind of the final score on what happened. But then if there was more that you want to get across, or you felt like you didn't phrase something the right way, or whatever it is, right through later that night or in the morning, there's still going to be people coming to it later on. So don't be afraid to kind of have that first draft up there as soon as possible, but then add to it with what comes to mind as the hours progress.
Yeah, that's a great point, Graham. Because what I was going to say too is we all know how busy we are in this industry. So I think it's good to keep yourself accountable and want to push yourself, but also give yourself grace too for those crossover seasons when you do just kind of need to get a recap up to move on to the next sport that you got to get their recap up too. But maybe in those slower seasons, find ways to challenge yourself, especially if there's a game or a postseason match where there really is a story beyond just what the box score is telling you.
Yeah, just to add to that, I would say pick and choose your moments sometimes too. If it's something that you think is really worthwhile putting a lot of effort to, if it's some exciting game or a buzzer beater or a championship, those types of things that could be exciting, it's okay to spend a little extra time with those, and make sure you get them to how you feel comfortable that they should be. If it's, the basic game that isn't as exciting, then you don't have to spend as much energy, but, do what you need to do, but you don't have to spend, but with those other things that could be exciting or could lend themselves to a really great storytelling moment, don't hesitate to put that extra time into it if you need to.
Absolutely. And this next question kind of touches on a similar topic. As SIDs, yeah, we don't want it to be repetitive, but we also want to make sure that each story is similar in structure and it's consistent with with all the branding at our various schools. So how do you ensure that the releases that are often similar in structure and content, like the previews, like the recaps, are written in a varied differently and enough to sound different, but not sound too repetitive?
I think all of us are stumped. It's a good question. I think it was Drew, or maybe Danny, you said it, but just the importance of kind of giving yourself grace. There are going to be releases that do sound similar and that are, because a lot of the stuff is going to be the same kind of template. So don't be afraid of that necessarily. Don't worry too much about uh, it sounding similar, because they are going to be similar. As far as kind of how you can freshen it up, I mean, the voice, if you're able to incorporate, quotes or outside perspectives, whether it's from a coach or a student athlete or somebody in administration, that that can be kind of a way to get a fresh voice or a fresh perspective in what otherwise sounds like the same release that people have read 4 or 5 times. So that is one thought that I would have about that.
Yeah, I think Drew said this a little bit ago, but like recognizing a moment when there is one, or the potential for a moment when there is one, to sort of save yourself from feeling like you have to differentiate your previews for every single, 50 baseball game season. If you're doing previews for baseball, like if there's a big game coming up or a big series, like maybe you take advantage of that moment to capitalize and switch things up, but don't like break your back over, finding 50 different ways to write a baseball preview.
I would just add to that too. Like, I feel like this comes into play a lot more when teams are just like on those really bad losing streaks and they're just not having a good season. You're like, what else can I say about this? Um, I think one thing that I've talked about with my assistants is like, you know, or were there anything that maybe you can pull out? Like maybe it was a season high on something, or maybe somebody broke a record, or like something like that. Like to help just make it a little bit different than the last recap, if there's something there. And if there isn't, then there just isn't. And you write the recap and chalk it up to another one and hope the next one's better.
Absolutely. And speaking on structure, we actually had another audience question that asked about structure. What is the structure that you use when writing a recap story? You know, just from personal experience on this one, I kind of tend to start. I usually tend to start with the lead and the nut graph, whereas a feature, I'll usually write that last. I'll usually write, okay, what is the most important thing that is important in this recap and preview? What's the headline? Like, did they beat a ranked team, or did a player reach a certain milestone? Did they break a program record? What's the most significant piece about that game or that preview that people like, they need to know this information? That's how I usually start my recaps, and then I just kind of let that kind of be the baseline for the story for the rest of the piece. Drew, what's kind of your structure on this when writing a recap, or when recapping any kind of website story?
I think for your standard recap, for me, I try to keep it somewhat like an AP style type recap, unless there's something specific that I really wanted to touch on and hit on and make it like that special. Like I was talking about, if that's a special moment, a game winner, at the buzzer, or a walk off home run or something like that, then obviously I put a lot of emphasis on that at the beginning and turn it into a more detailed type recap. So it really depends on the moment and kind of what happens. Every game's different, but there's a lot of similarities, obviously. So I think for me, it really just depends on what happens within the game, and if there's a story to tell within the story, I'm definitely going to try to do that if I can.
Yeah, I just add, uh, don't bury the lead. I think you were talking about that, Grant. Like, it's often, I think there's a temptation, if you're writing in kind of a running diary fashion where you're adding to it over the course of the game, you can end up getting the most important part happens late in the game and it's down in the eighth or ninth paragraph, if you have 8 or 9 paragraphs in the recap. But so, just make sure once the game is over or whatever, or you're done writing the recap, to kind of just, it sounds stupid, but make sure you have things in the right order in terms of the importance. And you were talking about it, Grant. Just make sure you have the most important part of it early.
Yeah, I think the best piece of advice I got, because very early on at Davidson, I was writing these like really lengthy recaps for every single game. And the best advice I got from someone who was kind of a similar background to Drew and Graham was, if you're going to lose your reader like 3 paragraphs in, do they at least know what happened in the game? Like, do they know like who won, who lost, and like what was that big defining moment? Like, get that out early and in front of people, so that they can kind of digest things as quickly as possible, I guess.
Absolutely. And I know with these stories, like a lot of like, especially if we're we're writing these at late at night, and we're writing these like, we're just wanting to get it out of the way. A lot of times sometimes, that wow factor, gets lost in these stories. Do you guys have any tips on how to create wow factors outside of the basic trends, fonts, sounds, just anything that makes that piece stand out and that's worthy of putting like in a portfolio?
Go ahead, Graham.
Are you asking about kind of the recap format or just overall?
I think just overall, yeah, just overall feature, like any type of piece, like that can be like feature, feature recaps, anything like that. Yeah, I know, Graham, you're certainly know what about wow factor. You were recently named a winner in the Fred Stabley writing contest, as was Drew. So obviously there's some wow there's definitely this group definitely knows about how to add that wow factor.
Yeah, I think. Oh, thank you for that. First of all, I think it goes back to just like we learn like the first day in journalism, like show don't tell, like just let the story do the speaking. Because if you have a good story, that's where the wow factor is going to come from. It's not really going to come from your tight turn of phrase or anything kind of cute and clever that you write. It's going to come from the reporting that you did. It's going to come from the story of the person involved. It's going to come from just kind of what the actual content is. So don't try it. Don't try it and find the wow factor. Like try and do a really good story and tell the story. And if you do that well, then it should have a natural wow factor.
I think there are ways to like for, we've all got different like website providers these days, but there are ways to dress up a story if that's maybe that's kind of the way I interpreted this question. With like Adobe, I think it's Express now, where you can like add those visual aids. You can make a quote in your story like a little bit more prevalent as the reader is scrolling so that it almost feels like a little bit more of an interactive piece, but you're not fully like leaning into that digital social media storytelling aspect. I know Sidearm has like the Sidearm narrator feature, which is very similar to what Adobe Express does, but I guess it allows you to add a little bit more dynamic things to your pages. So those are always like kind of fun to play around with, but you have to Graham's point, like you have to write a good story first, and then those factors can come in and just add like the finishing touches on a story.
Yeah, 100% agree there. Like for me, you focus on the story and make it what it needs to be or what you think it should be. And then I also, anytime we run a feature on our website, I always use the sidearm version of the narrator because I think that just it changes it up and makes it a little bit different than just the normal recap type story.
Absolutely. And kind of speaking on that, for feature stories, is there a certain like time? I know like we all have our own timetables, like, we may have like other tasks that we may do. So, we may not have like as much time to write that feature story. So is there a certain like time frame that you guys from start to finish that from researching to publishing that you guys are have or is it kind of just based on a case by case basis for story? And then kind of following up on that, how many stories do you think a school should publish a year? I just from personal experience, I know that at Tarleton State, we typically try to post at least one feature story a month, as an athletic department, and we actually use that as a sponsor piece. So we have one of our local businesses in Stephenville, Texas, sponsors that as the website for the website, and that kind of kills two birds with one stone, if you will. So and I think for research, I think it just depends. Like sometimes I've had like for a 500 word story, I may spend a couple hours on it, but if it's a longer piece that I want to go more in depth, like a 1,500 word story, I certainly will like take more time. But at least for personal experience, I don't think there's really like any timetable. I like specific timetable. I think it's just a case by case basis. And school wise, I think it's I think more of the better, but I think it's definitely good to have some good balance and flow. And I know that once a month works for us well at Tarleton State. So, but I'd love to hear the group's thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think for us, it really depends on the situation. Like typically, like if we have a student athlete that makes like a national tournament, whether golf, wrestling, whatever, or a team, that's when we definitely like kind of make it a priority to do something on those teams. And sometimes that's a quick turnaround. Like I said, one of our protocols was to do that with wrestling, and then not this year, but the previous year we had 6 guys qualify for nationals. I wrote 6 features in like a week. Uh, don't not recommended always, but I think it's just finding what works for your institution. Like sometimes like during the summer when we know what our Hall of Fame class is going to be, we try to do a feature on each of those incoming Hall of Famers. And we take our time with it. It takes a month or two to do the interviews and go about that process. 2 years ago, I did a 20th anniversary on our golf team winning the national championship, and that took like a good month to track down all those people that were on that team and do those types of research things. So if you have time to do that, that's great. But I think it just depends on the situation and each individual situation.
Yeah, I would agree with Drew. Just it's case by case, and sometimes it's like when you find out about a story and when it makes the most sense to get that out, it could be like 8 months away, it could be like 8 days away. So it's like really just kind of being adaptable and kind of being ready to actively look for stories, but also be ready to respond, like if you learn about something in real time.
Yeah, the more time that you have, the better, obviously, but sometimes that's not going to be that's going to be a few hours or overnight. On the volume of stories, like I know we try not to flood the zone too much and kind of balance things out, but I also feel like that's where kind of the modern social media um, aspect comes in, that like all our teams have their own kind of social media channels and outlets, and sometimes you're going to write a feature that maybe isn't for the entire audience, or certainly not at first. It's for kind of that niche audience for that particular team, and then hopefully you can kind of plan ahead and do stories that mix in stories that have kind of timeless evergreen qualities, like Drew was talking about. A story on a team from 20 years ago obviously is tied to an anniversary, but that's going to have legs. That's going to People are going to find that a week later or 2 weeks later or 3 weeks later, and it's still going to be interesting, as opposed to like a preview going into a championship event. So if you can figure out kind of how to balance the load between things that are very urgent and time sensitive and things that have more of a timeless quality.
Yeah, and Graham, I want to start with you on this next audience question because it's actually a interesting one. So, as the Vanderbilt athletics beat writer, your job is to give positive promotion to tell that story of Vanderbilt. But I know, and sometimes when you're at a game, and Tennessee's there, you you don't want to mention them, but maybe you have to in this situation, or maybe something happens. How do you feel about including nothing at all about the other team in a recap or preview, or is it necessary or is that necessary to help tell the story? And how do you limit that if that's the case?
Yeah, I should say up front that I don't do a lot of kind of the recap stuff, so I don't speak for Vanderbilt on this. But like my belief is that you should include the facts, like Drew was talking about earlier, like writing recaps and like kind of an AP mindset. Like if somebody passed for 500 yards and threw 5 touchdowns and they happen to play for the other team, mention that somewhere in the recap. You're certainly not going to dwell on it or celebrate it, but like that's part of what happened um, in the game. So like in a factual sense, the basics are in there for the other team. But yeah, our job is writing about Vanderbilt. So like I'm not gonna it's not about avoiding the basic facts, but it is about kind of writing from a Vanderbilt perspective.
Dani, what are your thoughts on that?
I would agree with the same thing. Like, I'm not telling the opponent's story, but I will highlight the leaders in a box score from the opposing team. Mention maybe, especially if it's regardless, uh, acknowledge what their record is in the recap. And if it's a conference opponent, maybe talk about like how this implicates, conference standings and stuff like that. So be honest and be truthful about, what the box score says, but I'm not, really going out of my way to highlight the other team.
Yeah, I would echo the same things. Like I'll include it if it's something factual, but I'm not going to go out of my way to applaud the other team or throw them under the bus either. I think it's important to make sure you write positively about your team and the things you can pull out, and if there are factual things that happened in the game that you feel like are noteworthy or make a difference in helping the reader understand the game. I think it's important to put those in, but it doesn't mean you have to go out of your way to name a player. You can just say the school did such and such.
Absolutely. Yeah. And kind of just speaking on personal experience for me, I usually like if they had like a last second shot or there was a key play in the game that the opposing team made that affects the outcome of what Tarleton State did, I will definitely include that in the recap. And, that's what I tell my coaches is that, this was a part of the game. This is what helps tell that story. And, all of our coaches here understand that. And everywhere I've been, they've understood that as well. So I think, if it's relevant information, then it should be included. This is still a journalism background, so it's facts. It's facts at the end of the day. And like I and speak. So this next audience question is definitely interesting. Is there a statistic? Drew, I'll start with you on this one. Is there a statistic that gives the percentage of people who read short features compared to long features? Like anything on the website that like where you're able to see like what types of stories get the most traction?
It's a good question. I'm sure there are some things out there. Like I know like Sidearm has some different analytics stuff. I don't know that there's anything really in depth to maybe share. I don't know if any of the other panelists might know of anything, um, but I'm not sure. It's a good question.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not super sure of any like analytics tracking, sites for stuff like that. But I will say like I think you can kind of go off of your social media interactions that you use to promote your stories, but I don't specifically know about like tracking the readership itself.
I I would add like I don't know those analytics either, but I would add like one thought that I've always had is that there's a big difference in how many people read the story and how many people get something out of the story. Like you might have a higher traffic volume on a shorter story or click through rate on one of those, but are those people going to be invested in what they read? Or are they going to be more likely to think positively about the school, go to games, give to the school, all sorts of things? So it's not just the volume of traffic you're getting, it's the return on investment for what you're putting out there.
Absolutely, and I'll add as well that statistics, if those are available, that is certainly very helpful in helping recognize what types of stories your audience wants to read. Because when I was with the Washington Commanders, we had like in the back end of our website, we actually had that data to where we could see how many times a story was clicked on and how many times it was read. That was really helpful information for us to come up with the next story idea, or like see, okay, which player or coach, which ones are the fans most wanting to read about. So yeah, I think those statistics are definitely very important. And if there's an opportunity on your back end of the website, I think absolutely take full advantage of that, because yeah, it definitely helped when I was with the Washington Commanders. And it definitely statistics are helpful. They don't lie, that's for sure. Excuse me. I know we touched. I know we touched a little bit on social media copy. Do any of you have any specific examples of teams, universities that do that best, or what do you think that makes a caption great, and what do you think keeps you interested when it comes across one? Like Graham, I'll start with you on this question.
Well, I'm going to say Vanderbilt does it really well, just as a company man. But no, I do think like I'm really impressed by our baseball program. Like obviously, they have our largest following for our teams, and I feel like they're really creative in differentiating what they do. Just being because they really lean into what social media is able to give you. It's that quick inside look, kind of the on the field perspective of the walk-off home run, or just being able to kind of make people a part of the dugout or on the field. That's the element that social media is great for. It's perfect for because it puts you there. Where which is a very different part of the equation than what the written word does. But yeah, I love following, and it sounds like I am a company man, but I do love following our social accounts because I learn because I didn't grow up with social media, so I enjoy kind of seeing how they leverage that kind of platform to draw people in and how they use it.
I swear I was going to say Vandy baseball before you even brought it up. The Vandy Boys baseball account is like one of the best, I think, social media accounts in the game. So if anybody's interested, take a look at what they're doing. Um, but yeah, I know I touched on this like one of my first answers, but I'm really big on like social listening and paying attention to what other people are doing because I think that's the best way for you. If you're someone who's writing a lot of social media copy, I think that's the best way for you to stay engaged and see what other programs are doing and what works for them and what doesn't work and how to keep up with trends and stuff like that. Um, and the other thing I would say too is like, it's okay to look around, don't copy and paste what other people are doing. But if you want to look at, institutions that are similar to the one that you're working at, like for Davidson, I do look at Vandy a lot and I do look at Northwestern. Like those are two pillars kind of for me where I try to draw inspiration from sometimes because I think there's a lot of similarities between us. Um, so just like know the people that you're being a reflection of on social media. And I think that's how you can best, come up with ways to represent them.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think for me, like at a Division 3 school, like I look at other Division 3 schools that are doing stuff well, but I also look at all divisions. I look at pro teams. I think there's always like I'm always looking for like what's that next big thing or what's that next trend, and really just trying to figure out okay, like not copy it, but what can we do that's some like can adapt that to what makes us us. And so just kind of looking at all those different factors and all the different things and following if there's a school or a pro team that I, really enjoy, I'll follow them and just kind of see what they do for a season and generates ideas for things that maybe we could do or adapt for us here at Averett.
Absolutely. And yeah, kind of touching on that too is, I grew up a sports fan, as all of you were, I'm sure, like, but like in this age of social media, I'm following like all of my favorite teams. Like I'm a big Oklahoma City Thunder fan, and I'm following them on every account, and I'm seeing what they do. And I actually got an idea today from one of their accounts that hopefully we're going to use here at Tarleton State. Like I know some, and so you keeping it in mind that the school you're at may not have the resources that some of these other schools have, but that doesn't mean you can't like get the fun, like take those fundamental ideas and and use it at your current institution. Because I know we do that a lot here at Tarleton State. We draw a lot of inspiration from the Dallas Fort Worth area teams. Like we draw inspiration from TCU. We draw inspiration from SMU. The Dallas Wings, Dallas Stars. Like we draw inspiration from all of those DFW teams. And kind of to close out this discussion, this is a great audience question that I wanted to save this one for last. What advice do you have for someone new to the industry that's looking to grow? I know it's not really a writing question. But I feel like it's still an important question for all of us to answer. I'll just start by saying, if you're looking to grow, like don't be afraid to make mistakes. I would call myself a perfectionist. I hate it when I make mistakes, but I've learned in my career that it's gonna happen. No matter how hard you try to be perfect, we're human at the end of the day, and it's okay to make mistakes. And and you don't want to beat yourself up over simple mistakes. Learn from it, move on to the next one. That's how you learn and grow. And it's definitely gotten me, helped me out at all the places that I've been, and it's been helpful here at Tarleton State. Drew, I'll start off with you on this question, as well as a fellow assistant AD, and then I'll go Dani, and then Graham to wrap it up.
Yeah, I think you can do several things. I mean, I think take advantage of the professional development opportunities, whether they're online like this webinar or at the convention. I think find people in this industry. We've all had to start somewhere, right? So, find people that you can connect with and make those connections and call them. Like early on in my career, I was the one that was always texting and calling other people and asking them the questions, advice, asking for advice or how do I do this? And now that I've been in this industry for a while, I welcome anybody to call me. And I have a lot of group texts with a lot of SIDs, where we talk about things going on and try to help each other out. So I think it's just be friends. Don't You're not alone. So make friends and talk to people, and because we're all going through similar things probably, and we're all there to help each other out. So don't be scared to reach out to anybody, even if you don't even know them. Reach out and do those things that talk to them and ask those questions, because everybody's going to be willing to help you out.
Yeah, I think having an open mind is the biggest trick you can have up your sleeve, especially in this industry. It's changed so much, and it's still changing so much, like with AI and all this stuff going on, content, social media. I think as SIDs, like we become a catch-all for a lot of our athletic departments, and we know we wear a lot of hats, and our coaches trust us, and they come to us for things that you're like, this is not my job description a lot of times. So just having an open mind and being solution oriented, and at the end of the day, like we're here to support our student athletes and coaches. So just keep that at the forefront of everything you're doing, and I think you'll have a lot of success in this business.
I guess I would have two things. One is kind of echoing what Drew was talking about. Like when you're in a press box or a media workroom, like which we often are, like you have access to professionals across the industry that's really rare for other industries. You're not going to be in a room with like a bunch of great chefs or a bunch of great insurance agents, like other than like conferences. Like you do that regularly in sports, and like there will be a few jerks out there, but by and large, anybody that you walk up to, like if they're not on deadline, and just like ask for advice or just ask a question, just try and get to know them. Like you have access to all these people. You have the opportunity to kind of pick their minds, and most of them are going to be, like Drew was saying, really happy to just add whatever they can to your experience. And that's a great free resource when you're going to be in those places anyway. And the other thing I would say is like, especially for this conversation and what we do is read and write, like just take the time to, which is can be hard to do, as Dani was saying, like people ask more and more of us, but when you do find time, just read and write, even if it's not for publication, even if it's just for a blog that 5 people read, like just to get more familiar with the language and how you think about it, because it's going to help you professionally, and it's going to help you just in communicating with people and kind of how you think about just using the language. When you get better at that, it will open a lot of doors.
Absolutely. A lot of great insight from our panelists today. Want to give a big thanks to our presenters today for the discussion and insights. A lot of great stuff. Thank you guys so much for being a part of this discussion. Again, this session will be on demand later on our CSC website and on our YouTube channel in a video format, and it'll also be available on your favorite podcast channels. Make sure to look at our 2025 CSC U Summit schedule for the other 2 sessions as well. Within a few days of our live sessions, we'll be sending out a short survey to all attendees via email. If you could just take a few minutes to provide your feedback and evaluation, that would be greatly appreciated so we can stay relevant and enhance our summit for next year. So thank you all again so much for being with us today, and enjoy the rest of your day, and don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have any other questions or need anything else. Thanks so much, everyone.